I tell you what,
It's not like the olden days.
I'm Rosie,
I'm Jay.
and this is our podcast on Watership Down. I'm going to talk about, and Jake's going to join in, I expect, the movie from 1978 and the TV series which began in 1999. And inevitably I'll talk a bit about the book as well. But the first thing I have to do is shout out to Annie, who loves Watership Down and is hoping to enjoy this podcast. So the pressure's on.
We're glad you're listening, Annie, and hope you continue to enjoy the olden days and make it a regular part of your life every other week.
I'll tell you the story of how I got interested in Watership Down. I must have been about 8 at the time, and one of the neighbourhood boys, who was considerably nicer to me than other neighbourhood boys, for some reason found it in his heart to think that I would like Watership Down, knowing that I liked animals, and lent me his copy of the book and the VHS of the film. And I tried to read the book, and I couldn't because it was too difficult. But I watched the video, and it spoke to me. Now, I was prepared for the film not to be that sort of nice, if you like. Now, everyone knows that Watership Down outrageously was given a U rating, and it's the most complained about film rating ever. So we don't need to make a big deal out of that, but it happened. But even so, I was prepared for a couple of reasons. One was that the VHS from this boy had the original cover of a rabbit in silhouette, looking very sort of toothy and rather unpleasant, really. Now, I don't know if it's a common misconception, thinking that it's actually a picture of a rabbit in a snare. I'll confess I had that impression once upon a time, so perhaps it's just me. But the rabbit's not actually in the snare, but even so, it doesn't look that happy, it's not very colourful, and it is said that this design was a direct result of the U rating to try and warn people that this film is dark and these rabbits are going to suffer and bleed and die. So I watched this film and I thought it was great. Another reason I was prepared was that possibly the very same week, certainly around that time, we'd been watching The Animals of Farthing Wood, which we'll talk about in a lot more detail very soon, I think. But that's got a certain amount of death in it, so when I started watching this film, and I thought, oh, it's going to be a bit like The Animals of Farthing Wood, because these animals' home is going to be built on and they're going to move away and find a new place to live. So I was sort of expecting them to get picked off one by one. As it happens, there isn't actually that much death, certainly of major characters. The first rabbit to die in the film is Violet, and when I read the book, I thought, well, hey, wait a minute, there's no Violet. And I found out that all the rabbits survived the journey from their warren to Watership Down, and that's a source of great pride for their leader, Hazel, and sort of proves him as a leader. And in the film, they put this character called Violet. She has about 3 lines, but you never see her speak the lines. They can't be bothered to animate that. And then she's suddenly picked up by a crow or something, and that's the end of her, and they made it up for the film, and I don't see the point of that. But it is inspired by a scene in the book with a crow which attacks them, and then after that there's not a lot of death, but there is a certain amount of bleeding and suffering.
Horrible, haunting delivery from Richard Adams as Fiver as Violet's gone rather sums up the whole movie in some way. It's rather disturbing, haunting, and unsettling.
Yes, well, as a child, I really didn't mind that sort of thing, for some reason. I'll talk a little bit about the cast, since you've mentioned Richard Adams. I don't know all of their names, actually, because there are quite a lot of them with quite small roles and some quite obscure actors. But it stars John Hurt as Hazel, and he's very good. Richard Adams as Fiver, as Jake mentioned, and Fiver's always been my favourite character. I very much engaged with the psychic aspect of him, and he's undersized and a bit of an underdog, and the British love an underdog, don't they? And I did get that from what I managed to read of the book, so I suppose I engaged with those 2 characters on that level before I actually watched the film. The third main rabbit is Bigwig, who, when I watched the film last night, I made a special point to remember the actor's name, which I can't always, and it's Michael Graham Cox. And you get various other people you've heard of, such as Hannah Gordon as Heisenflay, and Roy Kinnear as Pipkin, and they're all very good, very well cast, very good film. And when you haven't read the book and you're about 8 years old, it doesn't seem rushed. It seemed like it's designed to fit into an hour and a half. But then a couple of years after this, I read the book. I read it very slowly because I still wasn't that grown up, and I got people to read bits to me. And then as time went on, I read it more and more and more, and I started to realise the film is incredibly rushed, and things happen in a slightly different order than they do in the book for time. And one thing that really doesn't make a lot of sense is Holly going to Ephrafa before he meets up with the other rabbits. Would you like to say something, Jake? Would you like to explain what I mean?
Well, the difference is that Captain Holly, once he's made his way to join the rest of the gang after Sandalwood Warren has been destroyed, in the book comes to join them before Ephrafa is discovered or thought of or mentioned in any way, whereas in the film, Holly has apparently been to Ephrafa before catching up with the others, so that he can then come and tell them about it straight off, which is a classic sign of condensing the book into the film for time and perhaps flow, they thought. You were pointing out to me last night, though, that it rather undermines Keehar's usefulness as their eyes in the sky, because he goes out to find Ephrafa especially because they want some females to add to their community in the book, whereas in the film everything kind of just happen.
Yes, it doesn't make any sense Holly going to Africa first because it's in totally the opposite direction from Watership Down. Let's talk about Keehar now anyway, who's very funny. He's very funny in the book. He has some wonderful lines in this sort of broken English that the author, Richard Adams, just manages to capture. It's beautifully, wonderfully written, the whole thing. And on my DVD, there are some special features where the background artists speak about making the film, and the animators do as well. And they were telling me, the animators, that the outlandishness of the actor who played Keehar doing the voice really influenced how wacky he would be when they were animating him. And I can't remember the full name of that actor, by the way, because it's slightly unusual, but I happen to remember that his first name is Zero, which tells you it's not the most common name. But yes, another thing they do to speed it up is that Hazel and Pipkin recce the farm where they get in the book a couple of does and also a buck to come and join them before they get to Watership Down, which isn't a bad idea for saving time, but it also means that Keehar doesn't discover the farm for them either. So in the book, they find Keehar injured. He's a seagull, by the way, in case you didn't know, and nurse him back to health and get him to think himself of going to find some does for them. And he finds the farm rabbits and Ephrafa. And in the film, they've already found both of them between them.
I always thought in the film how pointless the whole farm sequence was. They didn't even get to take Clover away to join the Watership Down community. What's the point of putting it in, I used to think. It's no surprise to learn that they're supposed to get rabbits from there in the original continuity.
It's a shame. You wouldn't think it would be too much trouble and take up too much time for them just to get Clover, even if they don't get Haystack and Boxwood. But anyway, it has its problems, but it's a brilliant film, and fans of the book absolutely love the film. And what it does do, it uses a lot of direct quotes from the book, which I do approve of, because that's what the book is. It's the words. Something that really struck me when I was watching the film shortly after reading the book a long time ago is Cowslips Warren. They call it Cowslips Warren for shortness, or I do, I think people do, but there's no Chief Rabbit, and they do things like recite poetry and they push bricks into the wall. They do what? Says Blackberry. They make shapes like people would do. And all this is because they're living in this very disturbing situation where they know that their whole Warren area is snared every day, and the human leaves flayra, or good food, princely food for them to eat. So they're very sleek and healthy. And they do all this crazy stuff to forget and try to come to terms with it and pretend that it's okay. And in the film, you don't really get any of that. It's like, zoom, hello, have some flayra. Whoops, Bigwig's been caught in a snare. We'll have to dig the peg out. Let's go.
It's a bit like Hollywood being built on or near the San Andreas Fault, Cowslip's Warren, I think. But that's got some very interesting themes that I remember from the book. It's a striking bit of the book, and I never, ever, ever picked that up when you were watching the film. It was only the snare that seemed to have any significance. I didn't understand that it was there specially to catch this community of rabbits, and they knew all about it and didn't talk about it, and they didn't go into any of the themes at all.
I did pick that up after several watchings, I have to admit. Not to the extent that you get it from the book, but Fiver explains very briefly. The whole place is snared everywhere, every day. And I got that the poem that Cowslip recites was to do with death, and he says things like, what we need, rabbits need, is dignity and above all, the will to accept our fate. And you get, he wouldn't come. He told me to stop talking about it. So I got the basic idea after watching it a few times. But you haven't seen it as much as I have, and when I persuaded you to watch it a few years ago, what did you say? You said it wasn't as violent as you remembered.
Yes, I always thought it was an absolutely horrible film. First, when you were watching it, I thought, oh, what is this she's watching? It's the Animals of Farthing Wood with just rabbits. But I always found it terribly unsettling and depressing and dystopian. And the way the rabbits are drawn and animated with all the big eyes and the terribly sickly looking, it's absolutely disturbingly horrible, and I was left with that lasting impression. And perhaps there wasn't quite as much ripping each other's throats out as I had remembered, but it's pretty bad, and it just is rather an unpleasant thing to watch, in my opinion. It doesn't leave you feeling good.
They have red eyes. But yes, I can see what you mean, but I don't know. As a child, I really didn't mind, and I enjoyed the story and the characters, and it really spoke to me. And that has stuck with me all these years. Let's talk a little bit more about the main characters, because it's been mostly events so far. Hazel, you quite like to compare to Tide from Digimon, don't you?
Yes, he's my example, Hazel, of the leader whose special skill is leadership. Organising, rallying, inspiring people to achieve their own special skills and do their best and be a good team. And I think Hazel is a good example of that, because he doesn't have any other particular skills. Obviously, you've got things like Bigwig is strong, Captain Holly is strong as well, Kihar is a bird, Fiver has visions, Blackberry's clever, I don't know any others.
Blackberry, Bigwig and Fiver are Hazel's go-to support network. He relies on Blackberry for brains. He tells him at one point, I never know anything until you tell me. Fiver tells him if they're going to get killed or not, basically. And Bigwig he relies on for sort of tactics and intelligence, as well as his strength and fighting ability.
Bigwig's is a sort of military liaison, Bigwig having been in the Owsler at Sandalwood Warren. Captain Holly was in charge of it, of course, so they know all about military-like manoeuvres, police-like manoeuvres, and Hazel relies on them for that.
They also know about things like roads and Hurdadill and snares and lendries, which are badgers, because they've been out getting lettuce for the Chief Rabbit, and they've learned about these things, which you might not get from the film. You might think, well, why does Bigwig know everything? When he's in the snare, Hazel actually asks him, what did they tell you in Owsler? So you get why he knows no good biting wire. In the book he says a bit more. He says something about digging, and Hazel gets the idea that you have to dig, but then he needs Blackberry to figure out to dig out the peg, which happens in the film, and you very much get the idea that Blackberry is the clever one from that. But it wasn't really clear why he knew what a lendry a badger was and nobody else did, why he could explain the road, especially as you hadn't got to the snare bit yet. Blackberry comes up with all the clever ideas in the film, and obviously Fiver keeps saying, oh, we mustn't do this, we mustn't do that, we're going to die. So I very much got the idea of those characters from the film. Another one who has a certain skill, which is quite useful for morale boosting, actually, is Dandelion. Do you know Dandelion, the specialist girl?
Is it storytelling?
Yes, it is.
I remember it was in the cartoon series.
That's right. He's also incredibly fast, actually. He's compared to running like a hare and that kind of thing. But I did get that Dandelion was supposed to be a storyteller from the film after a few watchings. You get a couple of lines. Dandelion, why don't you tell us a story of Ella Herrera? And then a bit later, during the climax, when they're getting the dog to come and kill all the Ephrathans, Dandelion says, if we meet again, Hazel Ra, we'll have the makings of the best story ever. And Hazel says, and you'll be the one to tell it. Unfortunately, because they've only got an hour and a half, Dandelion doesn't actually get to tell any stories. What is quite interesting in the film is the story of the blessing of El Herrera, which is how it starts out. And as well, I think that helped to prepare me for the film not being nice and Disney-like, because it's a bit sort of weird. It has this very stylized animation. It looks sort of primitive, which I guess is to symbolise the idea that this is folklore, rabbit folklore. El Herrera, Prince of Rabbits, has got sort of swirls on his legs, and they're quite sort of, in some ways, anthropomorphised, gesturing with their hands, and in other ways, very basic, kind of two-dimensional. And I thought, oh, this is a bit different. It's the whole film animated in this style, but it isn't. I think it is a good opening for giving you the idea of the rabbits living in fear all the time, having their own folklore, and the story itself actually is very similar to evolution. Frith, that's the sun, made the world, he made all the stars, and in this version it says the world lived among the stars. Dandelion actually said the world was one of the stars, and I think, why have they changed that? Or I used to when I was younger, I used to think, why have they changed that just so pedants can't complain? But then I think, well, I suppose it's not supposed to be a rabbit telling the story, so you wouldn't think, okay, Dandelion doesn't know that. But anyway, it's similar to evolution is what I was saying, because Frith made all the animals, and at first he made them all the same. And then what happens is that Ella Herrera eats all the grass, well, his people eat all the grass, and they multiply everywhere, eating as they went, and the animals, the rabbits, sort of pop up out of the ground, which again is very sort of symbolic. So what happens is that Frith gives all of the animals a gift, and in the book you get what he gave the cow and the blackbird and things like that, and then cat, dog, fox, weasel, hawk, that kind of thing. To each of them he gave a fierce desire to hunt and slay the children of El Herrera.
Our cat certainly has that.
So then, when he blesses El Herrera and he's digging to get away from the fox and the weasel, and his bottom sticking out of the hole, and he says, if you want to bless me, you'll have to bless my bottom. Very well, said Frith. Be it so. And so he is given the means to defend himself or escape from predators. And that's pretty much evolution, isn't it?
Yes.
And Frith is the sun, as I think I mentioned, and you can tell from this animation that he's the sun. But again, it's very primitive and symbolic, and he's got all these sort of squiggles on him that I take for eyes, and I think I'm probably right, because it's to signify that he's sort of omniscient.
It's a bit like Teletubbies in that way.
And then what happens is that, to symbolise how things are going on, the rabbits are just blithely eating grass, sort of individual straight lines of drawing, primitive representation of grass, and along come the weasel and the fox and the hawk and all that kind of thing, and touch them, and then just sort of turn red and get this glazed expression, and you sort of think, oh, maybe it's going to be a bit violent then, and you'd be right.
It's very memorable, that bit. All the world will be your enemy, prince of 1,000 enemies. If they catch you, they will kill you. First they must catch you. It really sets the tone of danger and strangeness and just generally being unsettled that the film has.
It's a brilliant piece of writing, that. All the world will be your enemy, which you've just summed up for us, so I don't need to quote the whole thing, but they finish on it as well. And Hazel is flying off into the sun with the black rabbit of Inlay, which brings me to another little quibble, which is that when Hazel dies, aged more than the average wild rabbit, Mr. Lockley tells us that rabbits live for about 2 years, 3 years, I've forgotten, in the wild. He knows everything about rabbits, but Hazel lived longer than that all the same. And Ella Herrera comes to get him, and it doesn't explicitly say that in the book, but you get it from him having sparkly ears, which comes from one of the stories that Dandelion told. And in the film, it's the Black Rabbit of Inlay, and sometimes when I've got nothing in particular to do, I wonder about this. I think, is that a misreading? Is it because I think it might make more sense because they've made more of the Black Rabbit of Inlay and he is very much associated with death? But I thought what would have been nice if maybe Ella Herrera had come to get him, because they mention him. Why didn't you tell us the story of Ella Herrera? Ella Herrera has shown me what to do. And they used to show who he was that swirly, primitive drawing style. But they didn't do that.
The idea of come and join my Owsler and come into heaven, it should be Ella Herrera for that. He's the first rabbit, as it were.
And you get the impression from the book, which I don't think really comes across in the film, that only really special rabbits get to go and join the Owsler of Ella Herrera. But anyway, that's something that really wasn't time to go into, as well as the sort of more significant things that there wasn't time to go into either. So what I would like is a production which is as true to the book, as respectful of the book as the film, but has more time to do it. We had a missed opportunity to do that in 1999, which we'll talk about in a moment. And coming up for Christmas 2017, I believe, there's going to be a 4-part mini-series, which is an opportunity to do something wonderful. I don't quite dare to get my hopes up. We'll have to see how it goes. But the cast's up on the Internet Movie Database anyway. There's some slightly interesting people in it. James McAvoy as Hazel, which I do find a bit disappointing. I'm not crazy about James McAvoy.
He's always adequate, as we said after watching the recent Frankenstein with brilliant Daniel Radcliffe as well. Just adequate, be it as Mr. Tumnus or the guy in the University Challenge film, or probably Hazel, or Victor Frankenstein.
Looking at the cast, it seems quite promising. Clover, who they're supposed to get from the farm, 4 episodes. Haystack, who they're supposed to get from the farm, 2 episodes. Heisenflay, who's the main one in Ephrafa, 3 episodes. Her friend Nang, 3 episodes. Maybe it'll be good, maybe it won't. Let's talk about the cartoon series now, anyway.
Well, we first sat and watched the cartoon series on the floor of an unfurnished flat in the beginning of September 1999, and I immediately thought, oh, this is much nicer than the cartoon film version. Not all bleak and horrible, and they don't all look like they're dying of myxomatosis all the time. And it's perhaps going to be a more accessible version of the story for me. I remember being surprised, or certainly struck by the fact that the very first thing we see and hear is Keehaw. I knew he wasn't supposed to be in the beginning of the story, but then we come into it kind of in the middle of everything. You don't get the chat with the Chief Rabbit and stuff like you get in the movie. I suppose it's not that surprising that we get to hear Keehaw first, because they very much wanted to push him as a main character, being the late, great Rick Mayall. Very, very amusing comedy performances he does.
My first impressions were bad. Fans of the book and the film, as a general rule, hate the cartoon and they slag it off like there's no tomorrow. And this was my gut reaction when I was 14, because it didn't occur to me that someone would make a series of Watership Down and not stay true to the book and the order of events. So when the first episode was Keehaw flying about, oh look, we've already left. Here's Keehaw and also a mouse called Hannah who's not in the book. Oh look, here we are on a hill. It's called Watership Down, says Hannah, and that is what we English teachers call assertion, with minimal or no textual evidence.
She was right, though.
She was. I thought, what is this? What have they done? Why would you have an opportunity to do the whole book properly and not do it? I was livid. Over the years, coming back to it, I've tried to look at it objectively from the point of view of someone perhaps who hasn't even read the book or seen the film, which is actually impossible to do. I can't help having read the book and seen the film and fallen in love with them. So when I was watching it recently in preparation for this podcast, all I could think was, what wouldn't I get if I hadn't seen it before? For instance, Bigwig keeps going on about the Owsler. Yes, when I was in the Owsler, and I was thinking, if I didn't know what he meant, I would think, what is he talking about? Whereas in the film, the concept of the Owsler is introduced perfectly well. Toadflax nicking Fiver's coltsfoot. In the book, it's cowslip, and it took me years to work out what they were actually saying, but it's coltsfoot off of Owsler, you know that.
Fiver found it, Toadflax.
And we'll eat it. Then you see Bigwig is looking after the Chief Rabbit. This is still in the film.
I guess that's why I kind of think of Owser as secret police sometimes. They have these perks and oppress the other rabbits in some ways, abuse their position of authority. Like most people in authority, really.
Yes, the Sandalford Owsler is very much like that. Richard Adams explains in the book they're not all like that. Some of them are worse than that, like Ephraim. But then Hazel sets up a nice Owsler, where outskirters are treated with respect, and it's not just bullying and having privileges. But anyway, later on, shortly after that, Bigwig's saying, I've left the Owsler, and you think, okay, yeah, I know what the Owsler means in that case then. In this TV series, he keeps saying, oh, well, I was in the Owsler. And I was thinking, come on, you haven't explained. So that was one thing that I noticed. I'll say something positive about it, I think, before I go on. It is an attempt to take the ideas from the story and present them in more detail and more depth than the film was able to do. For instance, we haven't talked about General Woundwort yet, have we?
No, we haven't mentioned him specifically, but I think it's about to happen. You probably got the impression what Ephraim was like from everything that Big said earlier. General Woundwort is the chief rabbit of Ephraim, so you can imagine what he's like.
And in the film, he's just sort of oppressive for the sake of it, really. Neither the film nor the TV series explains that he's terrified of myxomatosis and other threats from human beings, which is why the warren has to be concealed, which is why it's very ordered and you're only allowed above ground at certain times, and no one is allowed to leave because he doesn't want rabbits being seen near the place.
I found that interesting in the book, the extension of humans coming in to spoil the rabbits' world, just like when they build over Sandalford Warren.
The cartoon doesn't explain that anyway, perhaps I think it's too complicated for children, but it does tell you that Woundwort has had a traumatic past and his mother was killed and partially eaten. Well, perhaps it doesn't tell you she was partially eaten like in the book, but by a weasel before his very eyes when he was young, and he's been rescued by a human being but grown up very wild and savage. And in the TV series, you get some of that Woundwort's past and some depth to his character. Possibly the best episode, or certainly the one I would showcase as an example of how it goes into more detail, is the Cowslip's Warren episode. The problem with it, which it took me a very long time to get over, and I'm not quite sure I have, is that they go and find it after they've already found Watership Down at the end of the first episode. So it doesn't make any sense for them to think that they might like to stay there when they've already found Watership Down. But anyway, Stephen Fry is Cowslip, which is quite interesting, and Strawberry is there, who in the book is a rabbit that they take away from Cowslip's Warren because he doesn't want to live in mad denial any longer. And that happens, and they do their ceremonial dance that the rabbits think is weird, and they show Hazel their shape that they've pushed into the wall. And they explain about why they do these things and how when a rabbit is taken by a snare, you just pretend he never existed. Thinking of this episode, though, brings me on to a point about Blackberry, who I have explained about. In the cartoon series, Blackberry is a doe, which is okay.
They made her a woman!
Well, it did actually cause a few problems.
See the last podcast if you want to know what I said there.
By the way, in the cartoon, when they're freeing rabbits from Ephraim and getting clover from the farm, and I'll speak more about this shortly, they don't seem too worried about whether they're does or not. They're just like, oh, let's go get some more rabbits.
We can all have a go on Blackberry if necessary, why not?
But anyway, she's supposed to be the brains of the outfit, and in the first episode, where they're crossing the river, which is a scene from the book and the film, Blackberry finds some wood for Hazel and Pipkin, who's also undersized, to be floated across on. And this happens in the TV series. It's actually a log, and they're calling it wood, and then later on they're saying, I remember the plank on the river. So I think there's been a bit of a breakdown between writer and storyboarder / animators there. But anyway, she does that, and she also finds the boat when that plan comes in handy again to escape down the river from the Africans. And slight tangent here, the funny thing is that in the cartoon, most of the time, the rabbits have more or less human intelligence. But in the book, they can't grasp the concept of Pipkin and Fiver get on the wood and float across the river. And then they do this in the TV series, or they attempt to, and Blackberry's saying, oh, look, they can get on this log here, well, this wood here. And Hazel and other people are going, no, I don't get it. And then it happens, and they do things like Hazel goes and opens the rabbit hutch on the farm without Blackberry's help. He's supposed to have Blackberry's help for that. And they do plenty of quite clever things. And then they're escaping from Ephrafa with Blackavar and Primrose, who I'm going to talk about in this promised talk about Ephrafa. And Blackberry's saying, oh, look, here's a boat. Well, Keehar explains it's a boat. Brilliant explanation of a boat Keehar has in the book and the film. Men make them go on water. I mean, you can't explain a boat any better than that, can you? And Blackberry's sitting on this boat saying, oh, look, we can all get in this boat and then we can float off down the river. And Hazel's like, no, I don't get it. And Fiver's saying, oh, you remember when me and Pipkin were on the plank? This is the same sort of thing. And if I were a child and I hadn't read the book, I would think, why doesn't Hazel get it?
Another time he'll be like, oh, there's a snake in this greenhouse. Must have been imported as some sort of pet. Oh well.
So in many ways what they were trying to do hasn't worked, but in some ways it has. Anyway, Blackberry, as I said, is supposed to show them how to open the rabbit hutch, and he/she is supposed to work out to dig the peg out when Bigwig's in the snare. And in the book, he has the idea of the bucks digging their own holes, because normally when you make a warren, the pregnant mummies dig the holes for their babies. So in the cartoon series anyway, Blackberry doesn't even go to Cowslip's warren, so Hazel and Fiver figure out to dig out the peg. She doesn't go to the farm. Hazel just knows how to open a rabbit hutch, but in the film as well, they seem to know how to chew open the fastening of the rabbit hutch, and Blackberry's keeping watch outside, which is a bit annoying. But anyway, she doesn't do that in the cartoon series. So what she does is she has these two float-along ideas, and then she says, well, I'm not digging the warren all on my own, you bucks have to dig as well. And she comes across as this awful nag, which is a bit of a problem. In the opening titles, she's standing there with Pipkin, Hazel, Fiver and Bigwig, like she's supposed to be one of the main ones, but then she ends up getting sidelined anyway. So that didn't work. Speaking of trying to get more females into the cast, why would you invent a mouse character to be voiced by Jane Horrocks, who's very good, when you must know you're not going to be able to think of anything for her to do? I'm getting a bit ranty, aren't I?
They've got all this stupid build-up, is it, in the second series, to her casting a magic spell at the end. I don't think it really helps proceeding. It's just a bit of a sideline.
To tell you the truth, in preparation for this podcast, I only watched 8 episodes. But I think the one you're thinking of is where they recreate the Ella Herrera story, where they show, in the book, they show Hufsa, a swimming pheasant and a singing hedgehog, while they're going to steal carrots, and then they're having this trial with Prince Rainbow, so that Hufsa will sound like a total nutter when he says, we went and we found a pheasant swimming to make its tail feathers grow, and we found a hedgehog singing to the moon to make the slugs come, and then we stole the carrots. You know, you get the idea. They do that to this character called Vervain, who we'll also talk about, when they don't want General Woundwort to know that somebody's done something, and Hannah dresses up as a sort of wizard and as a sort of spirit guide. So they adapt the Ella Herrera story. Is that the one you meant?
I remember that part, but I think there's more of a build-up over several episodes expanding on that. But it's not really worth talking about anymore, because I don't remember.
I don't remember that either. Anyway, let's talk about Ephrafa, because I've been promising it for ages. I watched up to the point where they get Blackavar, and who ought to be Heisenplay, but in fact is called Primrose, out of Ephrafa. And then I didn't want to watch anymore. I wasn't really enjoying it. So I missed some bits about Woundwart's deeper character and that kind of thing. But anyway, I remember when I first watched it, I wanted them to rip Blackavar's ears for trying to escape. When they'd finished with him, both his ears were ripped to shreds. Now, they didn't necessarily have to do it on screen. He didn't have to scream and cry and bleed. But it's a big part of the story that happens to him. They should have punished him in some way. And the scene happens where they're passing sentence on him for trying to escape, and I'm going, rip his ears! But they never do. Funnily enough, he was voiced by Stephen Gately.
Badly.
Who is also dead. Yes, and he was crap, basically.
No, Primrose!
He's in 3 episodes, and he's not very good, and he also sings Bright Eyes for the theme tune, which is an interesting choice. It's very much associated with the film, but it's not that appropriate because it's about death. They do cut out the line, how can you close and fail, when Stephen Gately sings it, but then it still says, how can the light that burns so brightly suddenly burn so pale. I don't think they understood the song, to be honest. And what was quite interesting at the time was that he was intending to release it as a single, and he wasn't allowed because he didn't have the copyright and he couldn't get the copyright. And he's dead too now, unfortunately. So I feel a bit bad about slagging him off, but honestly, he was not a voice actor by trade.
He's got into this horrible frame of mind of thinking, oh, I have to act, I have to really overdo it. And it just sounds terrible. He should have just read it as naturally as he could in his own voice.
When I was watching these 8 episodes of the TV series, episode 4, absolutely nothing happens except that the Ephrathans and Bigwig start sort of stalking each other for no reason. They're not going to look for does or anything. And then they encounter Primrose and Blackavar, and Hazel, who, by the way, is boring in this TV series, really struck me this time. He starts getting a thing for Primrose anyway, and then they're saying, oh, we must get Primrose and Blackavar out of Ephrafa, let's go and get them, oh, they're so oppressed. And I'm sort of thinking, well, what about the other ones? It's not because I want a doe and Hazel wants to get Primrose pregnant or anything, it's a sort of act of mercy because they have more human emotions as well as human intelligence. And then I was watching it and I started to think, well, there aren't really any other oppressed rabbits. It's just all the rabbits in Ephrafa oppressing Primrose and Blackavar. But then when Bigwig was infiltrating Ephrafa to try and get those 2 out and nobody else, there were some other oppressed rabbits. Poor beasts, says Bigwig, and I think, why don't you rescue them then? So it doesn't make that much sense. I don't know how much sense it makes if you haven't read the book and you don't know what's supposed to be going on. What is quite successful, though, is the 2 Owsla captains who are adapted from the book, Campion and Vervain. I'm reading the book at the moment, and I've just been reading a lot about Campion. And it says that he was one of the few rabbits in Ephrafa for whom Woundward had a genuine respect. What happens in the book eventually is that after Woundward is defeated, Campion negotiates peace and they agree with him that they're going to set up a warren in between Watership Down and Ephrafa when they start to get overcrowded, and he becomes a good chief rabbit, pretty much. So what they've done with this idea in the cartoon series is that they've made him a sort of force for good within Ephrafa, and he's secretly helping out the Watership rabbits, but he has a kind of respect for Woundward, which is why he doesn't leave altogether. You know, the kind of thing.
I always like that double agent stuff with Campion. I found it very memorable. That's something that's good, more workable in an ongoing series than it would be in a movie.
In the movie, I'm not sure if Campion has any lines actually, but Woundward's always talking to him. Campion, have I watched? So you get the idea that he's Woundward's go-to officer, but that's really all you get. And he does sort of quite evil looks and is quite pleased when he gets told that he has to watch people, kill people or whatever. Not time to go into his character in the film. The other Ephrathan captain is Vervain,
who we've mentioned before as being a baddie who's very bad but very cowardly, very ruthless but very ready to run from danger when he's not in a position of power with people backing him up, like Toad Air Marshal from Bucky O'Hare, and some versions of Mordred in Camelot, and Widdermere from Dogtanian, that was the other one.
There were some very interesting scenes with these two, actually, in the 8 episodes that I watched. There's a bit where Vervain's having a right old go at Primrose and threatening her and all that kind of thing, and Campion tells him off and says, don't ever treat anyone like that again, is one. And then you really see his cowardliness when Bigwig's infiltrating Ephrafa. He's had a sort of trial to see if he's going to be any good, and gets into a bit of a situation and is brought before Woundwort and ends up sort of attacking Vervain, and Vervain's completely freaking out and going, don't hurt me. And then Woundwort comes to intervene, and Vervain starts looking really rather excited at the prospect of seeing Bigwig, who moments before he was carrying away from, being ripped to pieces by Woundwort, which doesn't actually happen. He gets scratched for his Ephrafa identification mark, which are briefly explained in the film.
You will be identified by your mark. Memorable.
In the film and the book, by the way, you are marked with claws. They scratch you with their claws, which is probably easier to animate than what happens in the book, which is that you are bitten. Vervain does have a voice credit in the film, and he's addressed a couple of times, but not when he's speaking, so it's a bit difficult to work out which Ephrafa captain he is, but he's probably the one who has the most lines and is showing Bigwig the ropes. What does he do if that is him? He's a bit of a dick to Blackavar, to be honest. Tell him why you're here, Blackavar. And Blackavar, with his ripped ears, is sort of hesitating, and Vervain is tugging at his ears with his claws, that kind of thing, looking nasty. I never really thought about it before, but I suppose that is the translation of that character on the screen in the brief time of the film. In the book, he's not in it that much, but there is a extensive passage about how the rabbits under him don't really like him and respect him, and he earns his place through fear and that kind of thing. So that was a very interesting idea to take that character further in the TV show, and a successful one, I think.
I always liked Vervain in the TV show. I'm sure he and Campion are voiced by an actor called Rob Rackstraw, who does a lot of very good voice work, and we may mention him again in future if we talk about Avenger Penguins, perhaps. But I remember that one of the only watchable aspects of that crappy third series of the Watership Down TV series, which CITV never showed and was produced off in Canada, wasn't it? And it's hardly got any of the same voices. Vervain trying to help Woundwort take over this new warren and rebuild his empire, with Vervain using his low cunning and his sycophantic ways around General Woundwort to try and claw his way back up, because Woundwort's the only way he can get into a position of authority himself. I thought that was the most interesting aspect of that really rubbish series, and with Vervain having the same voice, very much seemed like the same character, and a good progression of where Vervain was in the second series.
Unfortunately, the rest of that series is a big pile of crap.
It is. They already mentioned Woundwort starting off at this warren called Darkhaven, and that's where he got traumatised. And they have Darkhaven in the third series, and it's this old junkyard, and all the rabbits are Australian there for some reason, and they do all sorts of strange things there.
One of them has a ship with Bigwig.
Yeah, it just doesn't work.
I think that's really all we need to say about that one.
Mm.
I do want to talk about the other main characters. Blackberry, Hannah, Keehaw, we've mentioned. To be honest, Keehaw's a complete joke in the cartoon series. There's this episode in the second series, which I don't like that much, where some of the rabbits get on a bus and go to the seaside so they can see his home. So moving away from the original idea of rabbits just trying to live to survive, to be rabbits there. But it is a very fun performance by Rick Mail, and he just loves doing the Keehawisms. He's much big meeting. Hazel, as I've said, is boring in the cartoon series. To be honest, I can't think of anything else to say. I'm not sure, I didn't look out for this, how much his leadership qualities really come through. They do the rivalry between him and Bigwig to start off with, which is something, again, they don't have much time to get into in the film. There's just Bigwig trying to tell Hazel what to do for a bit, and Hazel, rah, that'll be the day I call him chief, that will. But they do that in the TV series. And what makes them accept Hazel as chief? The fact that Bigwig got caught in a snare and Hazel helped him out.
I like the Fiver voice.
I was not too disappointed with what they did with Fiver. I remember saying to you when I was younger, he's not runty enough. And you said to me, I don't think he's really meant to be runty, just sort of younger and smaller. And I think you were right. Again, it's something they didn't really want to make too unpleasant looking. He sort of does look like Hazel but smaller, which is fine. That's what he's supposed to look like. And yes, he has a very appropriate voice. One thing they do that I consider dumbing down is they sort of slap a label on his psychic abilities, call it visions. They say he's had a vision of Watership Down, of the promised land, and they rhyme as well, which I found quite annoying because I, as a child, very much engaged with Fiver when it was not as clear-cut and more sort of ambiguous and mysterious than that. But I suppose it doesn't matter too much.
I see why they did that for a wide cartoon audience. I see why it would annoy real Watership Downers, and I don't have a feeling about it myself.
One scene I do like is when Fiver and Kihar are looking for Hazel after he's been shot, and he's in the bloody hole, as they call it in the book, in Fiver's dream. But I think in the cartoon series they just call it a drainage pipe or something. They know what it is, but they don't know about how to float on a boat. But anyway, he's using his psychic abilities to find Hazel, who is able to speak to his heart because they have this close relationship, so that's quite nice.
Kihar uses his swimming in that one, which is rather fun.
He doesn't get to do that in the film. He does do it a little bit in the book. But yes, it is nice to see him doing his swimming in the series. You were mentioning Dandelion being in the cartoon series because you remember he told stories in it. He was voiced by Phil Jupitus, actually, and he does tell some stories. The only one I saw in these 8 episodes was the story of the Blessing of Elafra, which was at the point in the story where he tells it in the book, which just makes me think, why didn't they do it all properly? But anyway, they have the animation, and I think it's very much an homage to that film opening where it's sort of swirly and stylized and primitive looking. So I quite approved of that. But what was incredibly weird was that whoever was doing the voice of Frith was being a bit of a Stephen Gately about it, actually. Oh, all the world will be your enemy, and doing it kind of stupidly, which was a bit disappointing. And they did the same thing with Silverweed, going back to Cowslip's War and reciting the death poem, really overdoing it. I give you my breath, my life, the silence. And I was thinking, why is he doing it like that? I don't think it was Stephen Gately, but perhaps it was somebody with a similar outlook. And it annoyed me because it missed out important details like, if you want to bless me, you'll have to bless my bottom. Frith just does it anyway. But apart from that, Dandelion with Hawkbit is a bit of a Sancho and Pedro, if you remember us talking about the Mysterious Cities of Gold. They go around complaining together because they've got wet or they're tired or whatever. So that's a bit annoying. Hawkbit in the book is described as a rather slow, stupid rabbit. The main thing he gets to do is complain when they've gone a long way and they're tired and no one seems to know where they're going. And certainly they've taken that aspect of the character for the TV series and made him sort of a grumpy complainer. He's not in the film. Someone who's in the film and not the TV series is Silver. He is a young member of the Owsler who Bigwig persuades to join them, and he gets bullied in the Owsler at Sandalford for being silver rather than sort of greyish-brown, and for being the Chief Rabbit's nephew.
Oh, he likes Sir Blaze. Oh, that's one for the future.
Yes, they're saying, oh, it's nepotism. And so he's not too happy in the Owsler. And what they do in the film is that they colour the Chief Rabbit the same sort of colour as Silver. But you wouldn't really know why unless you'd read the book and read that Silver was his nephew. Apart from that, Hawkbit and Silver swap. The gang who leave Sandalford are all the same, which leaves Bigwig and Pipkin Bigwig has much too big a wig, which is something fans don't like. He's only meant to have a little hair on the top of his head. He's got a bloody great mane. He's voiced by Stephen Mangan, who's fine, nothing special. Something else I consider oversimplifying and dumbing down is how militant Bigwig is, and when he's training the Owlsler, he's motivating them by insulting them. And when Fiver's running for his life, he's calling him undersized and things like that, which is a bit rude. Which would help children, I guess, to understand that an Owlsler is supposed to be sort of quite military and do soldiery stuff. But on the other hand, Hazel's Owlsler is meant to be much nicer than that, in contrast to the other ones that we see. Pipkin is quite interesting because in the book, he's a friend of Fiver's who is also undersized, getting a thin time at the Sandalford Warren. He starts out in the book as a bit of a wimp, and he goes on a journey and he gets braver. In the film, he pretty much seems to stay a wimp, because there's not time to do anything with him. And in the TV series, they've taken the idea of him being small and they made him a child.
Elliot Henderson Boyle, yay!
Voiced by Elliot Henderson Boyle, who shows up in all sorts of things, including Mind the Baby, Mr. Bean. And what they've done with the character there, he does not start off as a wimp. He is, if you remember our Digimon podcast, the TK. He is the heart of the team and the hope and light and the innocence. Possibly the most interesting thing that they do with him is that he ends up, I can't remember why, sort of living with General Woundwort, which sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? But in him, Woundwort sees his lost innocence and finds his inner child and can't help liking Pipkin and being nicer to him than he intended.
One thing I got an impression of with Pipkin in the cartoon series was he was Dandelion's kind of protege, and he was becoming the new storyteller who tells this Christmas story at one point. And I always did like that episode. Remember that episode you were just talking about, where Pipkin is being held captive in Ephrafa for some reason, and he and General Woundwort have conversations and connections, and it ends up with Pipkin trying to persuade Woundwort not to fight and saying something like, "No, General, this isn't the way," and Woundwort saying, "It's the only way I know." And it makes you think, as you were saying, about Woundwort's character on a deeper level, which is a good thing to do in an ongoing series.
By the way, Woundwort's voiced by John Hurt, who was obviously approached straight away as Hazel from the film. Would you like to be in this new series? Oh, yes, I would. Then, at the point where I stopped watching, Primrose and some other people, Hazel, go off and find Richard Briers playing a character who they've totally made up, and we were joking and saying Richard Briers has got on the phone and said, "If John Hurt's in on this, I want in on this, and I need this much money." Perhaps he wasn't aggressive about it like that.
Captain Broom, I always remembered that. He's a doddery old Owlsler captain, and he's a bit mad sometimes, but there's this episode where he does rather well at tricking some sort of invaders or interlopers into thinking.
It's Ephrafa, I think.
Is it?
Yeah.
And the Warren's all diseased and they will go away and leave it alone.
He comes out acting all mad and saying, "Oh, everyone seems to have died for some reason," or something. So things like that, the scene with Pipkin, work very well, and I find them quite memorable and I'm able to connect with them, just not on the level that I am a fan of the book of Watership Down, because they don't have a lot to do with what Richard Adams himself wrote, which is why a lot of the fans don't really like to give it a chance.
I'm hoping that John Hurt can make at least some small appearance in the new version of Watership Down. We know he's still alive. We saw him 2 days ago at the Wimbledon final. Well, that'll tell you the date we recorded this podcast if you really care to look it up. I always liked Stephen Fry's Cowslip. I think the way they draw Cowslip is quite good to make us understand that he's sleek and well-fed and well-groomed. He looks quite regal and outside the world of chaos that the rabbits know. I liked Stephen Fry's delivery of there is no bigwig. There never was when he's trying to be persuaded to help Bigwig out of the snare. And you said to me, well, that was perhaps overstating it a bit.
Yes, I don't like overstating, but I just recently been reading the book, and the way that Cowslip's Warren is introduced and comes to a head and Fiver explains everything, I find very effective. What is very effective in the book that you only really notice after you've read it a couple of times is where Fiver's wandered off, gone missing, and Hazel's saying, "Where's Fiver?" and Cowslip's pretending that there is no Fiver, there never was a Fiver. And after you read the book, you realise, well, he thinks Fiver's dead, he's gone off and got snared. I found that very affecting, but not something they do in either of the adaptations. Certainly you get the idea that they are well fed, well groomed, those cowslip rabbits. Strawberry is the same. I believe after a while they start calling Cowslip the chief rabbit, which is a bit annoying because they don't have a chief rabbit, because they're looked after by men and they don't need a chief rabbit, and they've forgotten the old ways and all that kind of thing.
Another oversimplification for the cartoon.
But I was pleasantly surprised when I watched that first Cowslip episode. They, come back at other times.
There's one where Cowslip and Ephrafa join forces against Watership Down.
Yeah, a bit silly.
Bit cliché.
Anyway, I was pleasantly surprised Holly has been there and left his companion Pimpernel behind on his way to find the Watership Down rabbits, which is adapted from something from the book. And Pimpernel's been got by a snare, by the way, so he's not a character. And he's saying, fellow called Cowslip seems to be in charge, and Hazel or someone says, what do you mean seems to be? He is or he isn't? And Holly's like, yeah, you would think. And I thought, they've got the idea there, but then they'd sort of forget about it and say, oh yes, Cowslip's chief rabbit. And what happened there was that Jake was saying generally positive things about the cartoon series, and I was saying generally negative things. But as a cartoon, not thinking about the book, just looking at it on its own, it's very difficult for me to do, but I think it's quite good, not brilliant.
Well, much as I can see why the film and cartoon are thought of in certain ways by real Watership Downers like Rosie, and much as I've realised that the cartoon does fall short in many ways, I think I'd still rather sit and watch the cartoon if I had to choose one, because it doesn't leave me feeling so bleak. There's quite enough of that in real life as far as I'm concerned. And it will be interesting to see how the 2017 version turns out.
So that's quite a lot of what I think about Watership Down, and probably what all of Jake thinks about Watership Down. Hope you enjoyed it, Annie in particular, and I hope you'll join us next time when we will be talking about
The Animals of Farthing Wood. It's going to follow on quite nicely from this podcast. As you may remember, it was mentioned earlier, and I think Rosie will tell us next week some of the similarities between Watership Down and The Animals of Farthing Wood. Some things Farthing Wood has copied from Watership Down. So it'll be quite a good link in that way. Do join us for that.
Until then, good night out there.
Whatever you are.